The morning they took me to Maplewood, my son-in-law put a pen in my hand and smiled like he was doing me a favor. "Just your signature here, Wilfred," he said, sliding the papers across the intake desk. "Standard paperwork. You know how these places are." I looked at the forms. I looked at them very carefully, and what I read had nothing to do with standard paperwork. It was a continuing power of attorney for property, a legal document that would hand complete control of my finances, my home, my accounts, every asset I had spent 40 years building, to my son-in-law, Brent Haskell. My name was already typed at the top, his was already typed underneath. All I had to do was sign. I sat very still. Across the desk, a young woman in pale blue scrubs smiled at me pleasantly. My daughter stood near the window with her back to us, staring at the parking lot, and Brent waited, one hand resting on the pen, his patience the kind that comes from certainty. They didn't know that 3 days earlier, I had driven to the Staples on Upper James and bought a small voice recorder, the kind I used back in my engineering days for site notes. They didn't know it was sitting in the inside pocket of my winter coat, switched on, recording every word spoken in that room. And they didn't know that the pill I'd swallowed at breakfast that morning, the little white capsule Brent placed on the kitchen counter beside my orange juice the same way he did every day, was sitting at the bottom of my coffee mug, undissolved. I had gotten good at palming it, pressing it against the roof of my mouth, pretending to drink. I had stopped taking the pills 4 days ago, and the fog that had been wrapping around my brain for 8 months had lifted. Slowly at first, then all at once, like a window being scraped clean after a hard frost. I remembered everything. My wife Frances died in October of 2022, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. We had 39 years together, our house on Sanford Avenue in Hamilton, 2 kids, a garden she tended like a second full-time job. She was gone 11 weeks after diagnosis. My daughter Donna was devastated. She'd always been closer to her mother. In the months after the funeral, she started coming by more often, bringing meals, checking in. I appreciated it. I was struggling. That kind of grief hollows you out in ways you don't expect. Donna had remarried 2 years before Frances died. Brent Haskell. She'd met him through a mutual friend. He owned a restaurant in Burlington, seemed charming enough, always had a joke ready. Frances didn't trust him. She said so, twice, quietly, in the way she did when she was serious about something. I told her she was being too cautious. He made Donna happy. I let it go. That was my mistake. About 14 months after Frances passed, so around December of 2023, things started to go sideways. I started losing track of conversations. I'd leave the stove on. I drove past my own street twice one evening and couldn't explain why. One morning I found my keys in the freezer and had no memory of putting them there. Donna sat me down one Sunday and told me she was worried. She'd spoken to a Dr. Harrington, a specialist she'd found through a referral. She said I'd been showing signs of vascular dementia, that Dr. Harrington had reviewed my recent blood work, that she'd made me an appointment, though I couldn't remember attending it, that he'd recommended medication to slow the progression. I didn't question it. I was afraid. Frances's father had died in a memory care home. The thought of becoming that, confused, dependent, unrecognizable to the people I loved, terrified me more than almost anything. Brent started coming by every morning to check in. He'd bring coffee, sit with me for half an hour, make sure I'd taken my pills. He was warm about it, considerate. I was grateful. The pills made me tired. More than tired, they made everything distant, underwater. Conversations faded before I could anchor them. Names slipped. Whole afternoons disappeared. I slept 12 hours in some nights and woke still exhausted. Donna said it was the disease progressing, Brent said. The doctor had warned them this might happen. I had no reason not to believe them. But 4 days before the drive to Maplewood, something shifted. My sister Glenda called. Glenda is 4 years younger than me, retired from nursing, lives in Dundas. We'd never been estranged exactly, but Brent had, I saw it clearly now on the other side of it, quietly been reducing my contact with her. He'd answer when she called and say I was resting. He'd say I'd tried to return her call, but couldn't figure out the phone. He'd positioned himself as the interpreter between me and the people who'd known me my whole life. But that Thursday she called my landline when Brent wasn't there. I picked up. Will, she said. She'd used that nickname since we were children. I need you to listen to me. Are you alone? I told her I was. I ran into Donald Marwick at Fortinos last week. Donald was a retired pharmacist I'd known for 30 years. He said he'd seen you at the dispensary counter with Brent picking up a prescription. He looked up the drug name on your bottle. Will, that medication isn't for dementia. It's a sedative. It's used for anxiety disorders or procedural sedation. In high doses over months, it causes exactly what you've been experiencing: confusion, fatigue, memory loss. I sat down at the kitchen table. Who prescribed it? She asked. Dr. Harrington, I said. A specialist Donna found. Glenda was quiet for a moment. I've checked every physician database in Ontario. There's no Dr. Harrington registered with the College of Physicians and Surgeons who practices anything near geriatric medicine in Hamilton or anywhere close to it. Will, I need you to stop taking that pill. That evening, I didn't take it. The next morning, I felt like I'd come up from underwater. The morning after that, I drove to Staples. There's something about sitting in that intake office at Maplewood Memory Care in Barrie, a 90-minute drive from home, far enough that I couldn't simply walk out and catch a bus, with that power of attorney form in front of me. That made it all crystallize. This was the endgame. This was what 8 months of fog had been building toward. Get me confused enough to stop asking questions. Get me isolated enough that no one would think to ask them on my behalf. Then drive me up to a facility 2 hours from anything familiar, hand me a pen, and call it paperwork. Once I signed that form, Brent would have complete legal authority over every financial decision in my life. My house on Sanford Avenue, paid off, worth somewhere around $850,000 in the current Hamilton market. My RRSP, which had sat untouched for years since I'd started drawing my pension, still holding close to $280,000. My TFSA, my CPP, all of it. I looked at the pen in my hand. I thought about what Francis had said about him. I set the pen down. I'm sorry, I said, making my voice sound uncertain, soft, the way I'd sounded for months, because I'd actually been uncertain and soft for months, and the performance was easy now that I understood it was a performance. I'm a little confused by all the words. Could we go through it more slowly? Brent's smile tightened by 1 millimeter. It's straightforward, Wilfred. It just means I can help manage things while you're getting settled here. Brent, my daughter Donna had turned from the window. Her voice had something strained in it. Maybe we can give him a minute. He's been given plenty of minutes, Brent said, then stopped himself. Put the smile back. I just mean the longer we delay the intake process. What does this form actually do? Donna asked the intake coordinator directly. The woman looked between them carefully. It grants the named individual, your husband, it appears, full authority over the resident's property and financial decisions. Donna looked at Brent. Something moved across her face that I hadn't seen in months. Something like seeing him clearly. I asked to use the restroom. The corridor was bright and smelled of floor cleaner and something floral trying to cover something else. I found a quiet alcove near the fire exit, pulled out my phone, and called Glenda. She answered on the second ring. Don't sign anything, I said. I'm at Maplewood Memory Care in Barrie. Brent is trying to get me to sign a continuing power of attorney. He told me it was intake paperwork. He never explained what it actually was. A beat of silence. Then are you safe right now? For the moment. I'm getting in the car. Don't sign anything. Is Donna there? Yes. How is she? I thought about the look on her face when the coordinator explained the form. I think she's starting to figure it out. Keep her close to you. I'll be there in an hour and 40 minutes. When I came back to the intake office, I told them I needed more time. I said the words were swimming. Brent pressed me twice more over the next 20 minutes. I kept drifting, sighing, asking questions that led nowhere. It was the performance of a confused old man, and I was very good at it by then. I'd had a real version to study from. At some point, Donna touched my hand and said quietly, Brent, let's get some coffee, give Dad some time. He didn't like it, but he went. I sat with the intake coordinator. Her name was Peggy. and I told her in a low, steady voice that I had been brought here without my full understanding of what I was being asked to sign, that my sister was on her way, and that I would appreciate it if she noted in her records that I had not consented to anything. She looked at me for a long moment. "I'll note it," she said. Glenda arrived at 12 minutes past 2. She came through the front entrance in her winter coat, chin up, the way she had walked into every room her entire life, like she belonged there, and whoever doubted it was the one with the problem. She sat across from me in the family lounge, took my hands and looked at me. "Your eyes are clear," she said. "Clearer than they've been in months." She nodded. "That tracks with the half-life. 3 to 4 days off the compound and the worst cognitive effects should lift." She glanced toward the corridor. "Where's Brent?" "Somewhere. Donna went to find him 20 minutes ago." Glenda set her bag on the table and pulled out a folder. "I made some calls this morning. There's no Dr. Harrington registered with the college in Ontario, not in any specialty relevant to your situation, but I found something else." She opened the folder. "Brent has a cousin, a Martin Haskell, runs a walk-in clinic in Stony Creek. No specialty credentials, registered as a general practitioner, nothing more. I think Martin is who signed whatever diagnostic paperwork Donna was shown." I stared at the folder. Brent had his cousin fake a dementia diagnosis. That's what it looks like. The recorder in my coat pocket was still running. We met Monica Kalesia the following morning, at her office on King Street in Hamilton. She'd practiced elder law for 18 years. Glenda had worked with her on a case during her nursing years, and trusted her without reservation. I placed the recorder on Monica's desk. She listened to the intake office conversation twice. When Brent said, "He's been given plenty of minutes," she paused the playback and made a note without looking up. "He was pressuring you to execute a legal document without disclosing its contents," she said. "To a man he had reason to believe was cognitively impaired. That's not merely a procedural irregularity. That's fraud." I told her everything else. The 8 months of pills, the fabricated diagnosis, Glenda being redirected every time she called, Brent gradually taking over the household management, picking up mail, sitting in on calls with my financial advisor, handling things I could no longer follow. Monica called a financial investigator she worked with regularly, a man named Brian, and within 4 hours he called back with findings that settled over me like cold water. Brent had added himself to my joint checking account, the account Frances and I had held together since 1991, the one I'd never thought to examine, because Frances had always managed the household finances, and after she died I'd been too grieved, then too fogged, to look. He had been making withdrawals for 5 months, 150 here, 400 there, nothing large enough to trigger an automatic flag. Total removed, just over $22,000. And then Brian found something else. 3 weeks before the Maplewood trip, Brent had filed an application with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice for guardianship of my person and property. The application included a medical certificate signed by Dr. Martin Haskell, the cousin, attesting that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. The application had not yet been granted, but if I had signed that power of attorney at Maplewood, the court process would have become irrelevant. Brent wouldn't have needed a judge. He would have had everything he needed on a single piece of paper, with my signature on it. Monica filed an injunction that afternoon freezing my accounts against any further unauthorized transfers. She also filed a formal complaint with the Ontario Provincial Police Elder Abuse Response Team. I haven't described Donna yet, and I should, because she matters in ways that are complicated. My daughter is 51 years old. She has her mother's eyes, and her mother's habit of going very quiet when she's thinking hard about something. She married Brent 4 years ago, and I believe she loved him, or believed she did or wanted to. I think Brent was very good at being loved. It's a specific kind of skill, the kind that people with bad intentions sometimes develop with great precision. When the OPP investigator sat down with her 2 days after Maplewood, Donna said she had believed the diagnosis was real. She had believed Dr. Harrington was a licensed specialist. She had trusted her husband when he said the medication was necessary and the facility was the kindest available option. The investigator asked about the power of attorney form. Donna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know that's what it was. He told me it was consent forms for the facility. I didn't read it." She had suspected something was wrong, she told them. But she hadn't let herself follow the suspicion all the way to where it was pointing. I believe her. That is the truth of it, and it's more complicated than anger, more complicated than forgiveness, because both of those things are still unresolved and will probably remain so for a long time. My granddaughter, Sadie, Donna's daughter from her first marriage, 21 years old, third year at McMaster studying social work, had been waiting on my front porch in the February cold when Glenda's car pulled into the driveway that evening. She hadn't known what had happened, but she'd been watching Brent for months, the way young people sometimes watch adults they don't quite trust, quietly, carefully from a distance that lets you see things the person being watched doesn't realize you can see. She told me, sitting in Glenda's kitchen with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, that she'd overheard a phone call Brent made 6 weeks earlier. She'd been upstairs doing laundry. He'd been in the kitchen below, and the house's old construction carried sound in ways he hadn't accounted for. She heard him say, "The timeline needs to move up. The guardianship application is taking too long. We need him to sign before anyone starts asking questions." She hadn't known what it meant. She'd told herself it was probably about something innocuous. She'd wanted it to be about something innocuous. "I should have said something sooner," she told me. "You're saying something now," I said. She gave a formal statement to the OPP. Her account of that overheard call, cross-referenced with the timeline of the guardianship application, was what the lead investigator later described as the connective tissue of the case. When they executed a search warrant on Brent's restaurant office and home computer, they found more. The restaurant had been failing for over 2 years. He owed close to $340,000 to 2 creditors. One of those debts was due in full by the middle of April, less than 8 weeks from the day he'd tried to get me to sign. They found email correspondence with Martin Haskell going back 14 months. Martin had agreed to sign the diagnostic paperwork in exchange for Brent forgiving a personal debt of about $28,000 between them. The emails discussed my symptoms in clinical-sounding language the OPP forensic accountant described as clearly templated from an online source, not the recorded observations of a treating physician. They found a draft of the power of attorney document dated 5 months before Maplewood. He'd been planning this since late summer. And in his email drafts, never sent, saved but not sent, they found a message addressed to a Hamilton realtor asking him for a preliminary property valuation on my house on Sanford Avenue. It was dated 6 days before the Maplewood trip. He had been planning to sell it. Brent was arrested on a Tuesday in March. The charges: criminal fraud, criminal negligence causing bodily harm, elder financial exploitation under the Ontario Seniors Wellness and Elder Abuse Prevention Act, and obtaining a financial benefit by fraud. Investigators were also examining whether the fabricated diagnosis constituted conspiracy with Martin Haskell, who was simultaneously under review by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. I watched the news clip with Glenda at her kitchen table. Brent in a gray jacket, walking into the Halton Regional Police Station with a lawyer at his side. Still straight-backed, still controlled. "He doesn't look scared," I said. "He will," Glenda said. Then she got up to put the kettle on, because that's what she does when she needs to keep her hands busy. Donna came to see me 3 weeks after the arrest. She'd been staying with a friend in Ancaster. We sat in the living room. Francis's garden visible through the back window, still dormant in March, the perennials just beginning to push up through the cold ground. I didn't know what to say. I'm not sure she did either. Eventually she said, "I thought he loved me." "I think he did," I said, "in whatever way he was capable of." "That's a kind way to put it. I've had time to think about it." She looked at her hands. "I should have paid more attention. I should have read those papers at Maplewood before I let them put them in front of you. I should have been your daughter instead of his wife." There's nothing clean about that sentence, nothing that resolves neatly. I've turned it over many times since, in the evenings when the house is quiet, and Francis is absent from every room in that particular way grief teaches you. What I told Donna was, I know. That was all. Just I know. We sat there for a while after that, and it wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't broken either. It was the beginning of something slow and careful and unclear, and that seemed honest. My GP, Dr. Yoon at the clinic on Concession Street, who I'd been seeing for 12 years, and whom Brent had managed to route me away from during the fog months by handling all my appointments through his so-called referral network, confirmed that the residual effects of prolonged sedative overuse would require monitoring for up to a year. He also confirmed, gently and clearly, that I had never displayed any clinical markers consistent with vascular dementia. I was not losing my mind. I had been medicated into resembling someone who was. There is a particular kind of rage that comes with that understanding, not hot, not loud, but very steady. Like a pilot light, it doesn't go out. I gave my first public talk in September at a community center in Dundas, organized through the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. About 60 people came, family caregivers, older adults, social work students, a couple of journalists. Sadie introduced me. She stood at the front in a blazer she'd borrowed from her mother, and she said that she was pursuing social work because of what she'd witnessed in her own family, and that what had happened to her grandfather had made her understand that silence is always a choice, and sometimes it is the wrong one. When it was my turn, I walked to the microphone and looked out at the room and I said, "My name is Wilfred Baines. I am 67 years old. For 8 months, someone I trusted drugged me, isolated me, falsified my medical records, and tried to strip me of everything I spent my life building. And for 8 months, because I trusted him, I let it happen. Not because I was foolish, because I was grieving and lonely and afraid. And those things make you vulnerable in ways that other people can learn to use." The room was very quiet. I'm here because my sister called me at the right moment, because a retired pharmacist recognized a drug name and knew it didn't add up, because my granddaughter trusted what she heard through a floor, and because, 4 days before I was supposed to sign away my own life, I walked into a Staples and bought a $30 voice recorder. A few people laughed at that. It helped. If you are an older adult and something feels wrong, if you are more exhausted than you should be, if your finances feel further away than they used to, if the people managing your life are also the people managing your access to the outside world, please tell someone, not tomorrow, today. And if you are the someone they tell, believe them. Brent's trial is scheduled for next spring. Martin Haskell has entered a guilty plea on the fraud charge in exchange for his cooperation. The College of Physicians and Surgeons has suspended his license pending the outcome. The house on Sanford Avenue is still mine. Francis's garden came back in June the way it always does. The peonies first, then the black-eyed Susans, then the daylilies she used to divide every few years until they filled the whole back bed. I still have coffee with Glenda on Thursdays. Sadie started a practicum placement with the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic this fall, working specifically on elder financial abuse cases. She called me during her first week to tell me about a client she'd met, an 82-year-old man whose son had been making RRSP withdrawals without his knowledge. "What did you do?" I asked. "I believed him," she said. I stood at my kitchen window in the early October evening, the street outside quiet, the maple by the curb already turning, and I thought about Francis, about what she'd said about Brent, quietly twice, in the way she had when she was serious about something, about how I'd told her she was being too cautious. She was right. She was almost always right. I'm glad I'm still here to know it. Drop a 2 in the comments if this story moved you, and tell me where you're watching from today. If you've ever had that something was wrong, but talked yourself out of trusting it, you are not alone. Pay attention to those feelings. They are trying to protect you. God bless and stay close to the people who have always known you best.